Okay, so what do you think the number one reason that escrows are canceled?
Home inspections.
Home inspections. Okay, now obviously that's a little bit of a soft toss. I teed that up for you because that's what we're talking on. But you know, if I asked that question and we were not doing training on this, a lot of people would probably say the loan. They can't get the loan. Or maybe the appraisal or something like that. But believe it or not, more escrows are canceled for the home inspection than any other reason. So what we want to do today is we want to go through what expectations can be, how to set up expectations for buyers and sellers. But here's the real thing we want to do. We want to get it so that as an expert agent, you're able to save more escrows for your seller and your buyer as well, okay, to put these together. So that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start talking about property inspections, okay? The first slide, I love this. It says, seller says, as is, okay? The buyer says, fix everything. Isn't that kind of how it goes pretty much? Yeah. Okay. Seller says, okay, as is, I read the contract, okay? And of course, then the buyer says, fix everything. Well, who is right, okay? Well, I'll tell you what, if you look at the contract, and we're gonna look at that in just a second, it's really, there's not a right or wrong, there's options to it. It's kind of almost written to be a little bit ambiguous for a really good reason, and that is to kind of leave it up to people to kind of further negotiate this. And by the way, I always let my clients know that there are at least 2 negotiations in every transaction. You know, one is going to be the price itself and the terms, the RPA. The next one's going to be the home inspection. I try to set my seller's expectations for that. Now, as the buyer's expectations, I try not to go into that like, oh, don't worry, if we don't get the price we want, we can hammer them on the inspection. I don't do that. But from a seller perspective, and I'm representing the seller, I'm a seller's agent, I want to set their expectations that, hey, once we got the terms together in the RPA, now we're moving down the road to the inspection, and that's going to probably potentially be another negotiation. And then we might even have to negotiate something on appraisal. Less likely, but still possible as well. So my job is to set the expectations before we get going from the buyer and the seller. I represent a seller. I let them know that the buyers are probably going to have some expectations of repairs. If I represent the buyer, I'm going to let them know that the contract says as is, but that doesn't take us out of the game completely. We still have the right to do the inspections. And in some cases, I think there are areas that we can make repair requests, and we may get a positive response from the seller. Now, don't ever tell your buyers that their expectation should be is that, oh yeah, the sellers should be able to fix this, this, and this. That's reasonable. Because all I would say to that is, show me where it says what a seller should fix. There's nothing anywhere that says what a seller should fix, okay? So that's why I like to leave the margins. Now, understand when we try to bring these buyers and sellers together on these in repair requests, it's more, in my opinion, of a mediation than what it is an arbitration. Okay. Now, by the way, let me kind of go over this. I'm going to give you a kind of a rabbit trail to another little training here. As you know, within the contract, it talks about in the event there's a dispute. In most cases, if it's above the small claims, then it goes to either, first of all, to mediation and then arbitration. Okay. Let me tell you the difference. Mediation is with a mediator, and that mediator's only goal is to bring the two sides together. Has nothing to do with fairness or righteousness or anything else. It's just to try to get them to come together. That's his goal. However, if that step fails and then it goes to arbitration, arbitration is trying to figure out who is right and to what extent. Okay? Mediation is trying to bring them together. I would try to look at these inspections to some degree as maybe a little bit more of a mediation than an arbitration. Okay? That's what I look at it. So you try to bring them together, try to find agreement, and come together on it. Okay. So what does the RPA say? Okay. What's the RPA say about inspections? Okay. Well, actually, if we look in what is now paragraph 11, but it's going to change because in a couple months we have a new RPA coming out in December, and that's going to change all the areas, but it's still going to be under the condition of property. And what it says is you kind of read it here. My print's pretty small. But unless otherwise agreed in writing, the property is sold as is in its physical condition as of the date of acceptance of the offer. Okay, acceptance of the offer, right? Okay, so that's what we think. But then we go on, it says one more thing, and this is where it kind of becomes a little ambiguous. It goes, the buyers has the right to conduct the investigation of the property, and based on the investigation, they may do one of three things: accept the property as is, which, as it was stated before, request repairs, or cancel this agreement. So as you can see, clearly when a seller says, I sold the property as is, it's as is but, okay? And then if the buyer says they have to take care of repairs, it says no, they don't have to. They can say no, but then you don't have to move forward if you don't want to, okay? So I usually like to talk in this kind of this mediation language where we're trying to bring people together to be reasonable on both sides, and usually you do, especially if you go through the right steps to do it. So let's be reasonable, okay? That's what we're talking about. What can the buyer and the seller expect to be repaired? So the RPA only refers to retrofit items. It does have an area in there which talks about smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and hot water heater strapping, but that's it. It says, and you check that box, the seller will take care of those because those are state items, okay? But there are no standard guidelines. So I know a lot of times I've heard agents saying, well, this is what a seller should fix, would be this or this or this or that. Well, where'd they get that from? Okay, I mean, they're making that up. Now, by the way, I've made mine up too. Okay, what I think should be reasonable, but there is no book on it. So you can't ever be too dogmatic about what a seller should fix, whether you represent the buyer or the seller, because there's no book on it, and they have the right to think whatever they want. A lot of times the buyer and the seller believe whatever they've had the experience with. So maybe they sold their home in a market which was a really difficult seller's market, much different than now, and the agent said, hey, listen, we were on the market for several months. I know they've got 15 different repair requests, but let's fix them. You want to go on the market again? And then conversely, maybe they sell in a market that's like right now where multiple offers, and then the situation is the seller says, hey, listen, I'm not going to fix anything. If you don't like it, we'll go back on the offer and take one of those other 12 offers we had, okay? So again, those are the expectations, okay? So again, the RPA only refers to those few retrofit items. There's no standard guidelines, okay? So if there's a written or verbal agreement, that's going to prevail. A lot of times you'll see in this market where a seller's going to write in the counteroffer that the buyer to take the property as is. They're just restating, okay, paragraph 11 in the RPA, but they're restating it, okay, without the other conditions to it. Now, if they're really going to write that correctly, they'd have to restate it with as is, and they'd also have to state then that they really have to accept it as is. But I can tell you, CAR is telling us that we cannot sell a property without allowing the buyer the inspection on the property and the right to move out of the escrow if they want to. And by the way, I don't ever want any of you putting in here that, as is, and then telling the buyer that they cannot do an inspection, they can't back out. Now you can set out the expectations that there's no repairs, okay, but you cannot deny them the ability to investigate the property as stated in paragraph 12 currently. Okay, so again, let them do their inspections, and if it comes back in a really bad situation, then they may cancel. Now, one of the questions here is, should a seller do an inspection before they ever sell the property so that they can kind of fix things? And I say no to that, okay? And the reason I say no to that is because if they do that inspection, then they have to give that inspection to the buyer. They have to pay for that inspection. The buyer will then may do their own inspection. Now you're going to have two people with a fine-tooth comb looking at it, and so I wouldn't recommend that. But what I would recommend is they repair all the things they know that are malfunction or safety items or code items. And that's where I usually go on this. I'm a little ahead of myself, but I've kind of let you know where I go on this. So anyway, don't do the inspection, but it is a good idea to have them do repairs that they know need to be done before that. Now, one of the things I like to talk about is sometimes money solves everything. Anytime I represent a seller, my goal is to, number one, get the buyer to take the property as is, but that usually doesn't work. So the next goal is to get a credit to the buyer. because the credit is one finality, it's done. You don't have to do the repairs, you don't have to have them inspected. There's not a degree of what, was it done in a skillful manner? You don't have all of these things that you have to worry about. So I love from a seller's perspective to just give the buyer a credit and be done with it. Now, the credit needs to be reasonable. If there's repairs that would add up to $500 and the buyer wants $5,000, then I'm gonna do repairs as opposed to doing a credit. But if the credit can be reasonable, then it certainly is, I think, the best way to go when you represent the seller. And sometimes I think it's the best way when we represent a buyer. Let's say, for instance, the buyer's gonna go in there and do a lot of remodeling for the property, and maybe the dishwasher isn't working. Well, they're gonna probably replace it anyway. Maybe you get a credit for it, a little credit for that. However, you're not gonna want it repaired because you're replacing it, or you're gonna do a lot of remodeling to it anyway. So that's why I look at that. I like to get a credit if I can, or a combination of maybe just a few repairs and some credit as well. A whole list of repairs, sometimes that's a good way to do it, but it's usually the hardest way to do it too, okay? So yeah, Steve?
In that example, the dishwasher, if a new one costs $500, what should they offer?
Yeah, that's actually in a next slide or two I got here, but let's just kind of cover it now, and that is that, I use the example in this slide ahead is, let's say for instance, that the roof is considered that it has no useful life left to it. That's a term often used by inspectors, no useful life, meaning it may not leak now, but it's probably gonna leak at the next rain or very soon thereafter, or it's shot, okay? Well, can the buyer expect a new roof? And this is what Steve is getting to, or a new dishwasher. Well, in my opinion, their expectation would be to have some useful life on that roof. So let's say the roof is a $20,000 item, okay? Just pick a number, it could be less or more. That's probably a fairly nice roof. You put a $20,000 roof on it. Well, I don't think the buyer has the right to a $20,000 credit or a brand new roof. I think the buyer has a reasonable cause, a reasonable claim to a portion of that, maybe some reasonable life, maybe 5 or 10 or 15 years of that. Let's say a roof has a 30-year life on it, okay? And maybe the buyer has the expectation of maybe having it 10 years left on the roof, or 5. So at 10 years, okay, we're talking about, $5,000 maybe, or $7,500. Okay, so we're looking at something more like that rather than $20,000. So if it's 25 at 5 years for a 20-year roof would be 25%, that's $5,000. So you don't really have that expectation, in my opinion, or shouldn't have the expectation for it to be replaced with something new. When you looked at that property, made the offer, you didn't have a new dishwasher or a brand new roof on there. So therefore, you don't have the right for the expectation to have something new. And certainly you shouldn't have the expectation for something not only new but upgraded, okay? So it's original equipment in an old house and now they want to upgrade it, then again, it shouldn't be upgraded, it should be original equipment, useful life. Again, that's not stated anywhere in the RPA. This is just Ed talking, and I think I can make an argument for that, but they have to come to this kind of mediation, kind of position before it really works. But I think that's a good way to explain it. And a good way to explain to a buyer why, no, you don't get a brand new dishwasher and an upgraded one at that, okay? Okay, so again, I like the credit instead under circumstances. When I work the buyers, I like a credit too, that can be good as well, okay? So here's my rule, Ed's rules, on what I like to think, which should be, something you can ask for. Now these are kind of loose and they're kind of, flexible to some degree, but code items, safety items, and function, okay? So what are code items? Code items are items that were code when the home was built. One of the things we run into a lot of times is there'll be an item on the property, like maybe say a GFCI, that maybe when the property was built, pre-92, didn't require GFIs or GFIs back then, they're GFCIs now, okay? They weren't required, okay? So I don't think the seller should have to replace something that wasn't required, and that's not a retrofit item. So again, that's where I believe the code items, but not current code. You can imagine, a lot of stairways were made, those spindles were pretty far apart, okay? But new code items require those to be closer together so that little, kids can't get their heads caught in it, okay? But that's not the seller responsibility. That might be a safety item and a code item. But really, in my opinion, that's a buyer issue, not a seller issue. Now, if the home is 2 years old in Rancho Mission Viejo, it's going to beat a code. If for some reason it's not, it should have been because it was code when it was built. Okay, but that won't be the case for you. And function is when something doesn't work that should work. Okay, so those are the items that I think should be taken. What I don't think should be taken care of are items that have useful life left on them, items that are we'd call cosmetic, things such as that. Those are items that you usually accept. So again, well, where do these rules come from? Those are Ed's rules. And what do they mean? They mean nothing. They're just what I like to lay out, but don't ever use that as a standard that my broker said this is what the rules are, because there are no rules for that. These are just rules I try to apply under what I would consider what I think is reasonable. Another person might see them completely unreasonable, okay? So again, now one of the things I like to do when we're negotiating offers is I like to have the expectations set between the two agents, because if they're the people that are talking to their clients and their expectations, I know that Fro, if I work with you or Steve or most of the people in this room, you know, we've gone over a lot of inspections together. We'll probably come together on something. This will probably be no problem because both of us will talk to our clients and give them the same expectations, and we'll probably not have a whole lot of problems in negotiating those repairs or that credit. So again, that's why I think it's really important that you try it, if you can, talk to the agent. Now, in this market, if I'm a buyer's agent, I'm not going to talk to the seller's agent and say, hey, listen, here's my expectations of repairs. I'm going to try to get the offer accepted. You know, if you're one of 12 offers, don't take a high horse position. It's not in your best interest. You know, once the offer is accepted, you may want to talk about what expectations might be. Okay, so there you go. That's what I like. I like code items, safety items, function. That's usually what I like to stick to. Dishwasher doesn't work, that's a malfunction. Okay, safety items would be, you know, we have a lot of safety items out there. Like I did an inspection fairly recently when my son bought a home, and they went in there and they said because the tile, they had tile steps up to the house there, that because they could be slightly slippery, they should have rails on them. He considered a safety item. Now, we certainly didn't ask for that, but so some safety items are really above and beyond what you might think. So you need to be a little careful because you can throw a lot of things under safety. You know, I've had people before, they look at an old fence, wooden fence or something, which we don't have many of those around here, but they said that's a safety item that is not working because it could fall over and, you know, hurt the kids or the dog. Okay, you can make that case. I don't think it's a strong case. Okay. So anyway, those are just some of, you know, kind of my rules. Have your own rules, but don't ever come back and say that this is what my broker said, that's the way it is, okay? Because that's not the way it is. So 3 things I always pay attention to. When I go through a property, and if I've ever walked through properties with, you know, people who were on the team when you guys were new, you always kind of got this from me. When I walk up to a property, when I can see my buyer is going to have some interest in a property, might be writing an offer, I like to look at 3 things. And in this order, number 1, the roof. Okay, you can see it from the back. I want to look at the roof from, you know, the street if you can. I want to see the field, the ridge caps, just the basic overall condition of it. I'm not doing a roof inspection, and I'm not an inspector, but if you can see something that is terrible on the roof just from the street, then it's probably going to be terrible. And literally from the street, you could probably give it a quick and dirty visual inspection, right? Why not? You can do it, do that. The next thing I like to look at is drainage. Drainage can also be, that's the second biggest issue. Drainage can be a pretty big problem. So I like to look when we're walking around the back to make sure that the drainage is where it should be, okay? And I like to see if they're poured out to the street. You can kind of see if there's been flow recently, almost always, especially if there's some, you know, water in the gutter right now, you can tell. I like to look at that. Most inspections, by the way, don't cover drainage. Okay, but I always like to ask the inspector, what do you think about the drainage? I know you don't actually do the actual inspection and test the drainage, but how's it look just for, you know, level and things like that? Is it below the weep grade and things like that? Does it have drainage? Is it poured out to the front? So drainage, that's just a visual thing I like to look at. And the third one, probably the biggest one of all, is geological. I've only come across 2 houses in my life that were listings I was going to take, that they're geological listings. One of them, I told the seller I'd have to have a geological inspection before I listed. He said no. I walked away from it. He begged me to list the house. I said, no way, not going to do it. The other one did get a geological inspection, had a lot of problems. We disclosed them all, and we actually had the buyer, who was a realtor that bought the property, completely knew about the thing, got certainly a better value on it, and I think he was very happy that he bought it. So that's but I'm not a geological inspector for sure, and don't pretend that you ever are with somebody. But there's obvious things that you can see. If you see the block wall fence in the back is separated from at one side from the other. If you go and you see the side of the house and they've got a lot of cracks, those cracks could be secondary consolidation, which means that after the house was built, it moves a little bit like all houses do, and those are cracks, or it could be structural damage. We just don't know. So, but I like to look, so if I can at least ask questions, okay? Again, I'm not a geological inspector. I'm not going to say much to my buyer. I just kind of want to know that those three areas look like they're fairly sound, just from what I know of all the inspections I've seen before. Now, again, we're still going to have inspections on the property. We might even have a geological inspection, okay? That'll be a buyer's choice. But those are the three things you can do, just kind of, you can look at that, and those are easy to do. I don't do it every property I show to buyers. I only do it if I think the buyers are interested, and then we might go forth with it. And in most cases, I'm not going to say anything to them. I might make some small statement, but I certainly don't want to tell them, oh, it looks like they got a great roof, it's geologically a sound house, and the drainage is awesome. I'm not qualified to say that, okay? But I am qualified in my mind to say, oop, there might be some red flags. I'm not telling you there are, but there might be some, okay? I think I could say that. That's the reasonable man kind of theory. Okay, so some items are really difficult inspections, and when we get to these items, I gotta tell you, there's like dual pane windows, okay? And they fog up a little bit. Should the seller have to fix that or not? I can make a case. I could sit here and make a 30-minute case from a seller's position or a buyer's position. I think both the cases would kind of conflict with each other. I'm not sure which one would be better. That's just a tough issue. Because I mean, if you're talking $1,000 a window to go in there and redo the window, or even $500 to redo panes, and you've got a lot of windows, that's a lot of money, right? So that's tough. Fireplace clamps are the most ridiculous thing, I think, because they're a code item. They're a $5 clamp that you can put on there, a little C-clamp that would take care of that. This is off the record. I personally don't want a clamp in my home. If I have a gas burning fireplace, not a wood fireplace, I would. But because forever you're going to have a gap in your fluid up there, and you're going to have cold air in your house or hot air 12 months a year coming in your house because there's an opening up there, and you've got a gas fireplace. Anyway, that's off the record. I'd never tell a buyer that, but that's my opinion. Door closers from the garage to the house. That's a code item, always has been. Okay, also that door must be a fire rated door from the garage to the house. But I can tell you, if I'm bringing groceries in through the garage, I don't want that thing to have to be, swinging open and closing. I want to open a door and let it sit there, okay? Now that's not the code, and I would never tell a buyer that I think they should take their house that way. I can tell them that if they do have that on there, then, some of them have sliders so you can slide it up and hold it, but I would want one of those in my house. That's just a personal issue. Wood fences, we don't have a lot of those around here, but wood fences could be issues because of what condition should there be a wood fence, okay? Hot water heater pans, they're supposed to be in there. A lot of times, especially in the garage, a lot of inspectors will say they're not as necessary. Those can be issues at times. I talked about the GFCIs earlier, to where homes built before 1992 weren't required to have them except in the bathrooms only, bathrooms and kitchens. And so, but buyers will want them everywhere now. And inspectors will always say that's a good thing to put. I think it's a safety item. Might be a safety item, but it's not a current code item, okay? And then we talked about this already, because Steve brought up the question, but what about a roof that has no useful life left? I think we've kind of talked on that enough. So let's kind of get the buyer and seller's responsibilities. This is law, what I'm talking about right now. This is the law and what the law says, and this is something that you literally should have memorized as your mantra that you can state to your buyers and sellers. Your sellers should know from you, from the first time that you meet with them and you start representing them, is that from a seller's point of view, that they must disclose anything that affects value or desirability. And that comes from a 1984 Easton versus Strasburg case, to where before that, everything was what was known as caveat emptor, buyer beware. But after that case law, that literally became that the seller must disclose anything that affects value or desirability, okay? And please let your sellers know, I mean, have that exact wording ready for them. Value or desirability. That covers a lot. It was meant to cover a lot in the case law itself. That the seller needs to tell us what they know about this house. If it affects value or desirability, those are big areas, right? If one doesn't get you, the other one does, okay? And so that's why we need to know that. Now, if you look in your buyer inspection advisory, that's that last sheet attached to your offer that we never look at or never read. Got to tell you, it's very clear in there. It has a statement in there that says the buyer has an affirmative duty to exercise reasonable care to protect themselves. So what that means is, this is kind of on the other hand. Seller must disclose, buyers must protect themselves. Okay, and you're the agent that needs to tell your buyers they must protect themselves. Okay, they must use they exercise reasonable care, and your sellers must disclose. And if we do that every time we represent a seller or a buyer, that's our duty as an agent. Okay, that's our duty as an agent. I'm not making this stuff up. This isn't Ed's laws. This is actual law. Okay, so that kind of goes over, the inspections. I want to talk one more thing about the inspections, and this is just, who's going to be there during the inspections and things like that, and then I'll kind of open it up to questions. Again, my opinion, anytime I have an inspection on a property where I'm the seller's agent, the buyer's agent, I want to be there. Now, I am not going to get in the way of the inspector's inspection, especially if I'm the seller's agent. Let that buyer go through let that inspector go through the property, do their entire inspection, do just an incredible job on it, okay? And then once the job is done, then what we're going to do is we're going to have the inspector go back and show us kind of what I call the action items, usually what they call the action items. And I want to walk through that. I think it's good when at that point you have the seller's agent, the buyer's agent, and the buyer there. Now, if I represent the seller, that's the buyer's option where they want to have their clients there or not. I think it's a good thing to do, but then let the inspector go through. One of the things you'll find inspectors do, and I find that there's a high level of expertise with most inspectors. I think most of them are very, very good. I rarely run into an inspector that I don't think really knows their job. They have too much liability. They wouldn't be in business very long if they weren't good, honestly. But good means that they find things that are wrong, and there's going to be a lot of things. That's what we need to do, is prepare a buyer that, hey, when you look at this home, okay, I'm not representing buyers and sellers in property other than Corey, I did just recently, and Cheese. And when they bought their home, I told them, I said, now, we're going to go through this inspection. And even though this home is only 4 years old, believe me, there's going to be a laundry list of things. Just like when you bought your last condo and it was brand new, and we did the inspection with the builder there, and they found all kinds of things. Well, we go through this property and there's 3 little things of which none of them were going to ask for it. They're so small. I can't believe it. That's how good it was. It's like probably one of the 5 best inspections I've ever seen. But I prepared them, and so once we went through it, then they knew how great that home was as far as from the condition. Most inspectors will give you kind of a off the cuff, what do you think about the home? And it might go like this. Well, there are a lot of things I've gone over with you that I kind of pointed out, but for the most part, the bones in this home are very, very good. Okay, and I want the inspector to kind of give us off the cuff, what do you think about this home, as if this were, you're talking to, a relative who is, who was buying this home. What would you really tell them, yes or no? You got to write all the things that are down that are wrong, but are they really that big a deal, or are they not? And if they are, I want to know. If there's something that's a deal killer there, maybe there is a geological issue. Like I said, thousands of homes, only a couple of them I've had that issue on, but they could be. Or a really bad roof, or terrible drainage. Those are things, or other things too. I want to know about that. So I like to go through it. I like to be there, whether I represent the seller or the buyer, to see what it is, because then when that repair request, whether I'm making the repair request or assisting the buyer in putting it together, or putting it together for the buyer, or whether I'm going to receive it from the buyer's agent, I'll have a good idea of what they're talking about. Okay. We talk about what's important in real estate and what's not important in real estate, to do just excellent work. This is one of the times that you need to do really excellent work, and that is when you're representing, a seller or buyer and going through this inspection process. So.